Hi, everyone. Welcome to Technical Takeoff. My name is Julia, and I'm a PM on the MEM team. I own security baselines and settings ingestion. Today, we've got some top 5 tips for you regarding policy management in Intune. I know you guys saw all the great information from Ignite. And while you're still digesting it, we'd love to dive a little deeper into some topics briefly covered during the session. So stay tuned.
Awesome. And as a quick introduction, I'm Mike Donoski. I'm a senior PM over here in Intune, also working on policy. And so we've gathered some tips for you today to sort of take you that next level deeper. To start off, Julia's got some tips to share on security baselines, and sort of we'll just have a quick chat about, where do you go? Maybe you're getting started. Maybe you've had an environment that's been around for decades, and you're just trying to figure out, hey, it's time to go modern. We're going to go use Intune. Where do you really start? How do you figure out which settings to use? And what tools do you use to get those settings deployed down to devices?
Thanks, Mike. Starting with security baselines. So security baselines are templates of recommended settings and a lot of values from industry experts. You can use baselines as a kind of like a starting point for setting recommendation to stay current and kind of like up to best practices as far as compliance and industry standards. So our setting, the group of curating settings on security baselines are considered the most relevant security related config options. They're recommended by our Microsoft security team that works closely in partnership with the security community. And unlike anywhere else in the console, you start with the default settings and you're able to customize each baseline that you deploy to enforce those settings and any values that you may require. So essentially, if you're establishing the security posture, baselines are a great way to start. They have different recommendations. At the end of the day, it comes down to each company and industry. So be sure to work kind of closely with your security team to evaluate what works for you, especially if you're working with group policy. Baselines are a great way to start. You have a setting template with predefined settings, predefined values. You're able to have a reporting experience to kind of show how compliant it is to industry standards. You're able to upgrade existing policies to the latest baseline version. And we'll talk a little bit more on that later. And you're also able to compare settings within different baseline versions to ensure that everything's working kind of smoothly and synthesized within your environment. So baselines are a great way to start establishing a security posture. And I'll hand it over to Mike now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of IT admins who maybe haven't started, or a lot of people who are starting for the first time down the route of modern management, or maybe they don't have all this experience of settings that have been set in the past, don't really know where to start requirements wise. And so that's why I love baselines. And it's also a great way where you can sort of go through, and instead of, it can be overwhelming to have every setting all at once that you're looking at. So the nice thing about baselines is it'll break it down in a sort of more of a workload managed or workload split set, and then you can go reason over those. And maybe some of those settings you're not quite ready to turn on. You can leave them off for now and then come back and turn them on when you're ready. But if you do have sort of this legacy environment, or it's actually your existing environment with group policy and things like that deploying down and everything's on-prem, group policy analytics is a great way to get started. If you're sort of past that baselines level, maybe you can use the baselines to study a little bit, but you've already got all this content in your group policy environment. And that's where group policy analytics comes in. It's a great tool where you can actually upload some output from your group policy environment. Once that is uploaded, we'll let you know which of the settings you have previously set on-prem are available over MDM. And we'll also, we've added a migrate button where you can, with a click of a button, create a settings catalog policy. Now, one thing that's, the real tip here, the real bit that's really going to help you go to the next level is it's not just an easy migrate button where you can just click it and say, hey, I'm good, everything's good, we're modern now. It's really important that you focus on that last word, analytics. Go through and analyze, whether it's before and you want to prune up your settings before uploading them, or afterwards. Either one works. We'll talk a little bit more about settings catalog and some of the features there that'll help you. But it's really important that you're, examining this and making sure that you're really stepping forward into the future. There's a lot of settings that no longer make sense. when we're talking about, Azure ADJ only devices. I do like to let people know, it's fine to leave stuff back on group policy. And as devices start moving to Azure ADJ only, go ahead and make sure that they have a good, strong security posture that's MDM only. And that's a good way for folks to sort of build a mental model about what to bring forward and what to leave behind. So let's say you're going through here and you've uploaded some settings, but you've got some stuff that you just need to go search for. Or let's say you get a new security requirement. Julia, that happens all the time. It's a Tuesday, you wake up, someone reads a blog article, and suddenly there's a new setting that everyone has to go turn on. We've all been there. So let's talk about how to find those settings. So here we are in the settings catalog. We're going to talk about some tips on how to find the setting that you're really looking for. So the settings catalog only contains the settings that you add to it. In the past, or even if you're using a baseline or something like that, all of the settings that you're using are all on the page all at once. The settings catalog, which launched just over a year ago, we really wanted to provide the opportunity for folks to create a policy out of only the settings that they want and provide a rich experience to search for those settings and find them. Something that I've found really useful is, let's say that you've got a policy. Let's go over here to this policy that I've been looking at, which is device installation. And let's say it is allow admin install. In the past, it might have taken some time for you to find the right setting. I'm going to go ahead and copy this path. I'm going to navigate back to the settings catalog. And I'm just going to throw that name right up here in search. When you search, you're searching not only the name of the setting, you're also searching the path of the setting, the reg key behind the setting, if it's an ADMX backed setting, or any other information that we store along with the setting. And so I'm going to click on my category here because this is the exact same setting that just popped up. And now it's here. I'm going to add this into my policy. Now, the other interesting thing about this policy is if you saw the path, the full path, it has an ADMX underscore before it. What that means is that this setting was a part of a group of settings that we added that are based on the ADMX technology. And there were about 1,400 settings that we added. We backported them. We recently added them so that they're usable on Pro SKU. And so what I'm going to do is, if I just want to see all of those, I'm going to do ADMX underscore and hit search. And now I've got my search results will come back and show me all the settings that follow that reg path. So you can use this search to find things more than just the name of the setting. And you can use it to find different keys and different categories and things like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out this search. And let's say that I'm dipping my toes in the water for Azure Virtual Desktop. Something interesting about Azure Virtual Desktop is it works a little bit differently as far as how policy is enforced on the device. With Enterprise Multi-Session, as the addition of Windows, it's running for Azure Virtual Desktop for multi-user. Device scope settings only apply when the device checks in, and user scope settings only apply when there's a user session check-in for MDM settings. The reason why this is important, because user scope settings write to HKey current user, which means they only impact the current user who's logged on. Whereas for local machine settings, those get written across the whole device. So any user using the device would be impacted by those settings. So to make sure that we're separating these correctly, one thing that we've done is we've put a scope filter in here to help you find the right settings based on which scope you're looking for, depending on what type of policy you're creating. Now, you can have them both in one policy and target them both to users and devices. That's totally fine. But to make sure that you're grabbing the right version of a policy, you can use this filter in order to find those settings that are particular to that scope. I can also go in here and add a filter for Enterprise Multi-Session so that I know that I'm grabbing settings that I know will apply to that. The way that that filter works is it will only show you the settings that are available for that version of the operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and here and do Enterprise Multi-Session. And now I know that any setting that I'm interacting with in here will work on that new Azure Virtual Desktop policy that I'm creating. All right. And that brings us to our next tip. I got a couple tips here to to work with our new feature for ADMX Import. You may have seen, if you're keeping your eye on the What's New blog, the wonderful What's New blog for Microsoft Endpoint Manager Intune, where we describe all the new features and settings that are coming out, that you can now import your own ADMX files into Intune and use them in your device configuration profiles. This is great for third-party apps, but also what we see is people who want to write their own ADMX file and import it. It's a little bit tricky, and there's some great resources out there to help you get started. What I find is that if I'm going to just modify one, that seems to be the best path. And I'll show you a little bit of some of the anatomy of an ADMX file. And then there's another thing that's important to note is that maybe in the past you're working with GPO, which is great. However, it requires line of sight to your domain controllers and things like that. There are certain ADMXs and certain registry locations when you're going through the MDM channel that are protected, and that's there to make sure that folks aren't ingesting settings. On the Windows side, this isn't a new feature for ADMX ingestion. We've been using it for a long time for things like Edge, OneDrive, and I know that there are folks out there who've been using this through custom OMA policy to install third-party application policy. And so this is just a way that we really want to make it easier. It's the same ADMX install CSP that you know and love. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you should keep in mind when you're deploying policy through there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my favorite ADMX, which is the Excel ADMX. And I'll just show you really quick some of the anatomy of a very, very basic setting. So this is a setting here. This is open files in the local intranet. This is just a random one that I scrolled to, and you'll see here that I've got the policy name, which is a reference to the ADML. So if you are writing your own ADMX, it's important to keep the language file in mind, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I copy this, the language file or the ADML file is associated with each ADMX file, and what it does is it provides a reference so that you can write multiple documents, multiple ADMLs that can be in multiple languages. This one happens to be English. Here's the string ID. So when the ADMX says, look up this string, it'll bring this string over. And that's really important so that we can render it in our user experience and in our interface when you go through and actually create the policy. It's the same that used to be used for GPEdit. But now we're using it right directly in the mem console in our dynamically generated UX, which is awesome. You can see here that this is a user class. So this is going to write to HKey current user. Here's another string here for the display name and some explain text over here to the right. And then if I scroll a little bit, you'll see that this is the key that's getting written. So this is the key in the registry that's going to be written. This area is one of those areas that is applicable to be written to, and I'll talk about what that means in a little bit, and the value name that's getting written. And now I'm going to go back to the left. So I'll show you here we're writing a 0 or 1. This is probably the most basic setting that you can really have, and this is just a small portion of the ADMX, but if you are going to go start editing these and playing with them and writing your own, I just wanted to share this, just sort of a little precursor to some of the learning that you'll be doing about ADMX if you're going to go down this path. And another great resource to have is this document if you're going to be writing your own ADMX. Please note that when ADMX policies are ingested, we check the reg path to make sure that there aren't maybe bad actors or people trying to go in and mess with areas of the registry that shouldn't be configured or edited. And so with this precaution, we can help to avoid security concerns. So just to point this out, ingested policies are not allowed to write to locations within system, software Microsoft, software policies Microsoft, minus these areas. So go ahead and take a look at this doc. I've linked it in the deck so you can take a look. So as you're going and writing, or if you see an error come back while you're playing with this, just know that keep this in the back of your mind as you're going through and starting to work with some of these new settings. That is it for tip number 3. I'm going to hand it back to Julia for tip number 2 for some more great information about our security baselines.
We just talked about finding settings and settings catalog. If you've seen any previous Ignites, we're converging everything into one infrastructure in the platform. So we're going to start using baselines actually on the same backend as we've done with endpoint security profiles. There's going to be a new baseline upgrade experience with the side-by-side approach, which I'll talk more on later. And we're going to just kind of talk through how we're going to think about baselines and that upgrade experience. So as mentioned, we'll be supporting the old infrastructure and the new infrastructure simultaneously, and we'll be improving the experience for all baselines. So Mike talked a little bit about settings catalog. So the new security baselines will be actually using settings catalog as opposed to the old infrastructure. So you'll see that a little bit more, once we release it. But it's really exciting because it, kind of have everything in one place and makes things a lot more seamless. And also, of course, you can't have new baselines without thinking about upgrading. So, with baselines, there's always an option to migrate older profiles to newer versions to keep customizations. However, when upgrading, we're going to kind of be building out this experience and ensuring that, you're able to not only keep your existing profiles, but also seeing what's new on the new version and how everything's changed. More on that, but we'll always recommend that you test the version update on a copy of your existing profiles and a group of devices before you update your live profiles. So if you're just starting out, you don't want to make a deployment to your entire production environment without making sure that you have every setting and customization that you actually want according to whatever you and your security team decide. So we always recommend that you kind of just test it out with a batch of like devices before kind of like deploying it. But with that new upgrade experience, you'll see improved reporting. You'll see improved kind of like UI and just kind of like the user experience. And you'll kind of just be able to kind of compare different baseline policies and versions a bit more easily and more seamlessly. So you're able to see, what exactly has changed, what's been removed, what's been added. And so, yeah, we have all of that coming, which is really exciting. And lastly, we also have new baselines, but right now we're focused on the Office Enterprise 365 baseline, which will be released very soon. We also hope to work with a lot of partner teams in the future to release baselines for a lot of other different technologies. So that's really exciting. It's coming soon. So our goal right now is to, get the Office baseline released. And then in the future, we'll have a lot of other baselines for a number of different teams and technologies that you can use to kind of customize depending on what's relevant to you in the industry. Those are the exciting things we have going on with the new upgrade experience and also new baselines coming very soon. And now I'll hand it back over to Mike.
Awesome. I am so excited for these new baselines to come out. I'm even more excited for these baselines, as Julia had just mentioned, to sort of move over to the platform that we've built and sort of introduced with the settings catalog. We've also gone and launched our endpoint security templates on the same backend. And this unified settings platform really allows us to sort of tie all these different policy types together. We get a lot of feedback from folks around there being too many places to configure settings. And previously, we get some feedback that the way that we had our UX and the way that our graph model worked wasn't exactly the easiest thing. And maybe you never even knew that we had the graph model behind the scenes, and it's easy to overlook. So for tip number one, our top tip for the day, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the graph model is, what it means, how it's changed from the past, and why it's important, and how this can sort of help you take your admin game to the next level. So the new graph model, if you've worked with the old graph model, and what is a graph model actually? So anytime that you're clicking around in Intune and deploying policy, assigning apps, things like that, deploying proactive remediations, everything that you interact with in the user experience in the console is backed by graph. And what that means, and I'll show you what this means in a demo here, is that those calls are just being made from our UX. And you can make these same calls from PowerShell. You can make these same calls from Graph Explorer. It's a great way to test things out. And in the past, what would happen is you would, if you're creating policy, you would have to enumerate the state for every policy, every setting that's in that policy. And that's different with our settings catalog back in our unified settings platform. And I'll show you what I mean. It's a little bit easier to understand when you see it. So in the settings catalog, the policy only contains the settings that I specify. So I've got this setting that we used earlier, allow administrators to override device installation restriction policies. I'm going to pull up above lock and just grab a random setting out of there. Let's say allow toasts. So now I've got two settings in here. If I go ahead and hit F12, I can actually see which settings are going to come across and get saved through my network trace. So I've hit F12 to open up the console. I've got my network tab here, and I'm going to click next. Next. Normally I would assign this, attach a scope tag. If I'm using scope tags in my environment, I would review the setting and I'd hit create. And you'll see this call here for configuration policies 201. The important thing to note is I can see all my information about this policy here. I can see the name, tech takeoff. There we go. I can see that it's for Windows 10. And the important thing to note, and when we say that we're converging things, what we mean is that when you create a baseline, it'll be based off the same exact graph call. Today, if you go into endpoint security and create an endpoint security profile off of a template, it has the same exact graph call, except those have a reference to a template so that we can use them in different ways. But if I come down here to my settings and I expand this, I can see that there are two settings saved here. And if I expand this even more, I can see my setting definition ID, which is the name of the setting that gets saved. And this graph call now just has a call for these two settings, nothing else, no other information in here. If there are child settings, they'll get added too. Child settings meaning if there's a setting that has other configurations that sort of define the experience, but they require that parent setting set, you'll see those in this call as well. So what can I do with these? F12 is your friend. I've got this thing open. I can come back here. I can right click this. I can copy this. I can copy this as PowerShell. I can copy this all as PowerShell. I can copy this and then go off into Graph Explorer and go ahead and replay this and create policies. I can create scripts and things like that. If you're going to go through this scripting, we have a lot of people who go through and do this. This is my top tip. Start with the samples. The samples are great, and we've got some awesome samples that our team has gone out and published out in GitHub. The link is out there in the deck. Go ahead and pull it down or look for the settings catalog import. We've got an import and export that folks can use. It's a good way where you can start with a policy, export it, and you can start to automate some of that policy creation in your environment. Of course, this might not be for everyone. It definitely depends on the size of your environment and what your goals are. But if you're in a highly delegated environment and you're trying to go through and create multiple copies of the same policies, maybe you're going from one environment to another environment, this is a great tool and it's going to help you tremendously. So for the number one tip that I wanted to share, it's really just all about some of the tools and some of the behind the scenes that can help you think about this new graph model and some of the things I'm excited about as we move forward and sort of unify everything on the same settings platform. You're going to have baselines, templates, and settings catalog all running off the same backend. And it's not just for Windows. We have iOS and Mac are on the same playing field. And keep your eyes open and look for additional areas that we're going to announce to come out on this same settings platform. So that's my top tip. We went through 5 top tips today. We talked about where to get started. Julia talked about the baselines, the security baselines, a great way to start. We touched on group policy analytics just briefly. For our third tip, we talked about ADMX Import. ADMX Import is a great way to add your third-party settings that you couldn't previously add through MDM. Maybe you could, but it's through a custom policy. We'll give you a nice, easy way to get those settings up into your environment so that you can deploy them down to keep your users secure and productive. We talked about upgrading your baselines. Julia talked about all of the new features that are coming out to baselines. She talked about the new baselines that are coming out. I am excited for the Office baseline because going through and doing all of that manually without that place to start and sort of having, we've all done it, have the Excel sheet up on one side and you've got the console up on the other and you're going line by line. We're sort of giving you that head start so you can start off with the Office baseline. It's the same Office baseline that's been published. We're just making it so much easier for you and then also easier to maintain with that awesome new upgrade experience. And the number one tip, we're talking about the new graph model, a little bit of behind the scenes on how settings catalog works, how to use F12 to figure out some more information about your policy, and maybe generalize some of those things, use the samples, and maybe take your first step down automation. maybe you're automating everything already, and this is just a nice little indicator of how it's a little bit different in the new unified settings platform. But we really hope that these 5 top tips can help you take your admin game to the next level. Julia, thank you. Do you have anything else to add?
Nope, you covered everything, Mike. That was great. Again, like we're really looking forward to everything coming up in baselines and just additional features like settings catalog and just kind of like merging everything and making a more seamless experience for everyone. So just stay tuned for that. But thanks, Mike, for all the great information that you provided.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, reach out, stay in contact, find us on Twitter, find us through this content. Go to Ignite, come to Ignite, join the calls, join the tech community, find us, share your feedback. We thrive on feedback. Keep it coming, please. And we really look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you.